As we come to the almost conclusion of the book of Exodus, we look at chapter 34, which in itself is a renewal of the covenant, as it is said. It is more than that, though, because a normal renewal of the covenant would simply be a saying, yes, we will continue to do what God has called us to do. This is a bit different, because now the people have already sinned. Now a covenant renewal would almost be like a brand new recommitment. And thus the events once again start with God. God tells Moses, I want you to come up on the mountain. I don't want anyone else close by. Whether this means that not even Joshua goes up, as apparently is the case. No flocks were to be pasturing near the mountain. God says, I want to talk with you, Moses, and that's it. We get another 40 days. It's almost as if God is going to test them once again to find out, will they now in this 40 days be faithful? As everyone else is to stand clear, the Lord comes down in a cloud. Hidden by that cloud, Moses is told to have carved out another 2 tablets that the Lord will have once again inscribed. Then we get into some very theological material. Theological in the sense, theos is the word for God, and logos is the word for speak. So God speaks, says, what does this say about God? And in one way, when we study the scriptures, we look at God in action. We see what God does against countries like Sodom and Gomorrah, against various tribal groups that will rebel against him. But there are also times when God describes who he is and what he is, kind of draws it all together. And here God says, I am gracious and merciful. I'm slow to anger. I'm abounding in steadfast love. I'm willing to love even to generation number 1000. This clearly says that God's heart is not looking to harm. It looks rather to keep the relationship. God says, I promise I'll do whatever I said I would. But there is also that other half of that connection that has to be there as well. And if Israel's going to pull away, then they are going to receive the consequences of their activity. So what does this mean when God says that he is merciful? We recognize that the whole understanding about forgiveness is not simply something that will take place in the New Testament. But already here, God is acting to hold off the consequences of the people's sin. The holding off is always intended as a way to lead them to be even more faithful. It's never intended as a way to allow them to continue on their own merry path, doing what they want. The Lord says, I want you to take me seriously. I'm not just going to come someday. I'm here with you now. I'm acting right now in a relationship with you. And I am a merciful God. Now that assumes that there is sinfulness involved. To be gracious, as God also says he is, that might be simply somebody who out of the largeness of his heart would do wonderful things. But to be merciful means probably more than just the sense of feeling sorry for someone. Having mercy on someone usually has the connotation that the other person doesn't deserve it. That's kind of strengthened by the fact that God says he is slow to anger. Remember, we've discussed in the past that the idea of anger, when it's talking about God, is not that kind of quick-tempered anger that we have, but it is an anger that rejects those who will not let him love them. God says, I want to love you. You keep pushing me away. I'm going to keep on trying. I don't get angry quickly. But finally, when I come to that point, then realize that there's no more turning back for you. In Israel's history, that's going to be the time when the city of Jerusalem is destroyed. That will be the time in the northern kingdom when the Assyrian Empire takes away those who lived in the north. After hundreds and hundreds of years. But God says finally when that point comes, and when the people go generation after generation, ignoring the will of God, then finally he will bring punishment upon them. We must be careful that we do not automatically bring all of those words up into today. Yes, that would be very easy to do. And it's something that we do readily when we want to find fault with someone else and bring problems onto someone else and simply write them off because they have been wicked against God. But the sense of what God talks about here is really taken care of on the cross. When Jesus says it is finished, he means that all of God's punishing, where God says, I have to do this to every human being, is all done. People who do not want to be in the relationship with God may still be under that wrath. But as far as God's concerned, that's when the punishment is finished. And it would be very easy for us to say, well, when we see some tragedy happen, well, God's punishing them for this. We need to recognize punishment is never meant to turn someone back. It is never meant just to have one person be an object lesson for somebody else. It is what comes on that individual, though the punishment often affects others. Here, the Lord even acknowledges that the third and fourth generation, children and grandchildren in a family, are going to be affected by what someone does. Probably not in the sense of 3 or 4 generations later, but in the extended families, that when someone who is punished for what he has done wrong, when the consequences of that come on, then many others in the family will be harmed as well. There's a story in the story about the taking of Jericho with a man named Achan, where he takes from the city of Jericho some money and then some clothing and buries it in his tent. Apparently his family knows about it, and then all of them are killed, and a big stone mound is put over their possessions, and that's the end of someone who tries to take and get for himself. But this idea of the third and fourth generation is something that we, of course, all learned when we learned Luther's explanation of the Ten Commandments, showing steadfast love to the thousands of those who love and keep the commandments, but that the sin comes on the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. In fact, we learned that the iniquity is visited, and to visit iniquity means that it comes home to roost where it had begun. God says, I deliver you from having to be wicked toward me and toward anyone else. If you choose to go back to a way where you ignore others or write them off or choose not to care for them, then finally that comes to you as well. Not in a sense of I want to hurt you, but in the sense that it's built in, kind of like a boomerang, that it's going to come back. The Lord says those who are in him need not fear that it'll come back upon them, but they do need to be in awe and respect of a God who says, I didn't do this for you so that you can just continue on your own merry way. The result of what is described here then is intended for the people to have a very, very serious reflective look at their own lives as well. And Moses says then, God, please, if you're a merciful God, please go along with us. And of course God acquiesces at that point and says that he will. He says he'll pardon the iniquity of those who have sinned. He won't let the fullness of their sin come on them, but he says because this is a stiff-necked people, that there are many who will have troubles. Of course, as they're going into that land, they're going to meet up with people who are very, very different from what they are. And they are thus told in advance that there are going to be people who are going to try and get them to go after their own gods and follow practices of those nations. We hear about the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Perizzites and Jebusites and all of those different kinds of peoples who were living in the land at that time. Of course, because of the sin of the spies and the people who distrust God, it will be another 40 years before they actually get into the land, but this was intended to happen rather quickly. The whole thing about these other gods, this whole business about idolatry, really is involved with what is security. What do people hold on to? And it's very, very difficult to hold on to belief in a God who says, don't even make a picture of me. In fact, if God is not holding on to me, I can't hold on to him. And that is the essence of what a covenant is. God says, I'm holding on to you now, settle down. Look at some of the miraculous things that have happened. The manna is still being provided, and then recognize I'll keep on doing that. I'm not going to change my ways all of a sudden. The people are then reminded of the various times when they were to be reflective of the blessings of God. What is it really to have the festival of unleavened bread and the festival of weeks, which is the beginning of the wheat harvest, and the ingathering in the fall, and the Sabbath day? Those are all times to remember the goodness of God. Not necessarily times to be bawled out for what they hadn't done, but to be having their eyes drawn from themselves and their own problems and concerns to look at God. Covenant renewal, this re-establishing of that covenant relationship, is something that remembers what God promises and what God has set in motion. We, in the middle of the week of our life, whether it's the individual week, the 6 days from Monday to Saturday, or whether it is in a certain time period of our life where it seems like the day of rest will never come, we are reminded that the Lord has made promises, and the one who created the heavens and the earth can certainly fulfill every promise. The people, thus the males, were to appear before God 3 times a year, to be remembering that God was keeping his end of the bargain. What was a harvest? God had said, I'll give you food, and the people would harvest. And all of that which went with that, the people were then being instructed already now, before they ever get in the land, that they might easily forget once they get in. If you think of Job, he had everything and then lost it all and stayed faithful. But already now God says to Moses, these people who have nothing now except what I've allowed them to have, they're going to get in that land and they are going to turn away from me. They're going to take everything that they get and then thank themselves for it. So already now they're being told about that. They then at the end of this, God says, I'll be driving all the others out. I'll be taking care of you. And as a result of that, you are supposed to be faithful to me. The people are to follow various other laws and customs. The whole thing about not boiling a baby kid in its mother's milk is mentioned here once again, and various other customs. And then as Moses comes down, we are told that he had a very shining face. The being in the presence of the glory of God left an impact on his own physique as well. So he comes down, and it's such a bright and shining face that the people can't look at him. They can't bear to see it. It's sort of like their eyes are hurting. We remember in the last section that it said when God's glory passes by that Moses would just get a very little hint of it. Well, even that was enough, that he has to put a veil on. Again, to be in God's presence is something that leaves someone different. God sometimes hides those who are filled with his glory under regular human flesh, under a veil, just as he himself, according to the Gospel of John, took on human flesh, tabernacled among us, veiled his glory. But at some times then he allowed that glory to be seen, most clearly on the cross, and as he came forth from the empty tomb, and then he took the veil off the eyes of all who were around, so that they could see him directly and live. Moses has veiled himself not because God does not want to be with us, but because those who are sinful need to come in a special way and have a special access into that presence. It comes when God says, I will not destroy you for your sinfulness. It comes when God says he'll be merciful. But Moses at this point doesn't have a whole sense of what that means. None of the people apparently do. That God says for me really to appear face to face with all of you is something I'm going to have to bear in my own self. I am going to have to take the power of this brokenness, this dividing wall of separation away. They can't know it at this time. They're not told what the cost of God's being merciful will be. And a lot of people might take for granted that God's a loving God. We hear that all the time. People say, well, God's supposed to be a God of love. How could he hurt anybody? The people will often lament, and this is something that we find so often in the scriptures where in the Psalms particularly the people cry out and they say, why are you doing this, God, and how long is it going to be until you fix everything? Without recognizing that their own sinfulness has often caused God to have to be behind that veil. But as this section comes to a conclusion, God reminds them that his mercy will be there. Later, we will be told what the cost would be in that new covenant that would be established in the death of Jesus. But even now, God says, yes, once again, I'll start over. And that's the good news for us time and time again, that God says, I put your sin in my heart. I take my glory and put it in yours. As we draw to a conclusion of the book of Exodus, we can be comforted with the fact that God does indeed renew his covenant with us, and we are thereby called to love as we've been loved, that we seek ways even with those who have hurt us, that we look for the Lord to heal our hearts so that we can go on together. Thank you, and may God's blessings be upon you.